As a director, it was up to me to kind of get into the mood of. Some people say Ron Howard is too nice to get along with anyone. But that doesn't mean he hasn't met some. Over the course of decades, he's directed some of the biggest stars in the world, dealing with their egos, tempers, and problems in ways that most directors would be afraid to touch. However, Howard himself says that there were a few artists who made him lose it. Those who made sets unpleasant, broke up friendships, and showed a darkness that not many people could believe. These aren't just tough entertainers. These 6 people were once named by Ron Howard as the worst people he had ever worked with. William Winkler. A lot of growing stars got their big break on Happy Days, which is pretty cool. People all over the world know Henry Winkler from his unforgettable part as Arthur Fonzie Fonzarelli. Before that, almost no one in Hollywood knew who he was. But not everyone on the show was famous for the first time. Ron Howard had been famous for years before he played the good guy Richie Cunningham. This was especially true after his early success on The Andy Griffith Show. Something cool happened as Happy Days became more well-known. The show's big break came with Fonzie. The writers quickly wrote about the cool guy in the leather jacket because fans couldn't get enough of him. Ron Howard noticed that Henry Winkler's Fonzie had become the main character by the 3rd season. Ron afterward said that he began to feel pushed aside and even a little jealous during that time. He remembered that almost 3/4 of the shows in the first few seasons were about Richie. But when Fonzie fever hit, that dropped by a huge amount. Ron was still in every show, but he said it was weird to see the spotlight shift to someone else. There were also numbers to back it up. By 1975, about 85.5% of all fan mail was going to Henry Winkler. Ron talked about that event in even more detail on the Graham Norton Show many years later. He said that the network and directors started to treat Fonzie differently after his fame went through the roof. He said it was a strange turn of events because he still liked Henry's act and respected him, but he couldn't help but feel angry. All eyes were on Fonzie when the show was being promoted, and he could tell that the people in charge didn't value him as much as they used to. He remembered that the press kept asking him, "Do you feel like someone who was used on his own show?" In a chat with Winkler, actor Alec Baldwin once said it all very well. He said that the star doesn't always stay the star. That's exactly what took place here. Richie Cunningham, played by Ron Howard, was the typical kid in 1950s America who helped build the show Happy Days. Fonzie wasn't even supposed to be a big character. Henry Winkler once said that he was only supposed to be in 7 of the 13 episodes each season. People really liked him, though, so the network couldn't help but give him a bigger part. Howard and Winkler's anger went away when they finally sat down and talked after a few seasons. A 2-part scene from the 4th season of the show was filmed at a dude ranch, and Winkler remembered a quiet moment. When Ron took his VW and drove him home. Winkler asked him straight out how he really felt about all the changes. Ron's answer told you everything you needed to know about him. He said there was nothing wrong with him. He was just doing a great job. He said that what happened hurt him, but he also said that it made the show better. That moment of honesty made them respect each other for a long time. Still, things almost went in a dramatic direction behind the scenes. They came up with a risky plan as Fonzie's popularity grew very quickly. They wanted to call the show Fonzie's Happy Days instead. Winkler was shocked by the idea and pushed back right away. He told them not to do it because it would be rude to the rest of the group and wouldn't work anyway. They were told to leave it alone, telling them that the show's strength was not just one character but the way the family interacted. Ron Howard was ready to leave if the change went through, but Winkler stood up for the group. He told the producers straight out that he would quit the show and go back to film school at USC if they changed the name, even though he was contractually bound to stay. In that way, he really cared about keeping the show's character. The name stayed the same in the end, and the group kept going. Even though there was tension between Ron and Henry at first, there was never any real trouble between them. They stayed friends over the years because they respected and understood each other. In spite of everything, Ron often said that working on Happy Days was easy and fun because he liked the people he worked with. That wasn't the end of their story. After many years apart, they worked together again on Arrested Development. Ron played the narrator and director, and Henry played the hilariously bad lawyer Barry Zuckerkorn. The fact that they kept working together showed that any anger or competition that had been there had been replaced by friendship and respect. Vince Vaughn. It's fall of 2010. Universal Pictures also releases the first video for The Dilemma, a comedy. There was no way that a simple 6-word line could cause one of the biggest scandals in Hollywood this decade. In the beginning of the trailer, Vince Vaughn, who is best known for his roles in Wedding Crashers and Dodgeball, was seen. With his eyes fixed on the camera, he said, on the surface, it seemed like typical Vaughn humor. It was brave, funny, and a little politically wrong. But the internet caught fire in just a few hours. The line was called offensive on social media, in the news, and by campaign groups. The film was strongly criticized by major news outlets such as CNN, Variety, and The Guardian, who said it normalized hurtful language. Then there was the famous moment Anderson Cooper had on Anderson Cooper 360. He didn't hold back on the October 8th show. He said jokes like that teach kids that bad language is okay, which is not what we want them to learn. That one comment changed the subject from movies to something else. It sparked a national conversation about humor, duty, and free speech. After only 4 days, Universal took down the video. The company did everything it could to fix the problem. And everyone looked at Ron Howard, who directed the movie. Howard was in the middle of post-production work in Chicago when several executives, reporters, and lawyers called him on the phone. Everyone was interested in what he was going to do with that line. The Los Angeles Times' Patrick Goldstein wrote a piece called, "What Should Ron Howard Do About Vince Vaughn's Line?" It said everything about Howard's problem. You can either cut the line and play it safe, or you can keep it and fight for freedom of expression. He was going to get hot either way. A week later, Howard didn't keep quiet. He did something brave. There was an open letter from him in the Los Angeles Times called, "The Big Picture." It was in it that he said the line wasn't meant to be funny, but to show a character. Ronnie, played by Vaughn, was a quick-tempered person who spoke without thought. Howard said that line showed who Ronnie was, not what the movie was about. That reason seemed to work at first. Howard's answer was praised by publications such as Entertainment Weekly and The Guardian as a smart mix between an apology and an artistic defense. But most people weren't as willing to forgive. Panels on Good Morning America and The Today Show got very angry when they asked Howard if he should have just cut the line. What began as an ad for a movie had grown into a full-on cultural discussion. Things got worse when Vince Vaughn came into the picture. When reporters from CNN met up with him in Beverly Hills, he defended the joke by saying that it made things worse instead of better. Many people saw it as him ignoring the complaints completely, which made people even more angry. What most people didn't know was that Vaughn already had a bad name, which made things even worse. In 2001, he was arrested after a fight in a North Carolina bar that sent his co-star Steve Buscemi to the hospital. He later broke up with Jennifer Aniston in 2006, which got a lot of attention. There were fights with reporters that led to rumors that he was easily angered. Folks who heard that line in the trailer didn't just hear a character, they heard Vaughn himself, being direct, rude, and unwilling to say sorry. Ron Howard, on the other hand, was the clean-cut golden boy of Hollywood. The director of A Beautiful Mind, who won an Oscar, was known for being calm and having a job that didn't cause any trouble. But this time, he was in the middle of everything. When he tried to protect the purity of art, studios and activists put pressure on him. As Peter Barth of Variety put it, Howard was having his worst PR problem since the Da Vinci Code. When The Dilemma finally came out in January 2011, it was clear that all the fuss had worn off. The movie didn't do well at the box office, it made less than $70 million, and reviewers said it was tone-deaf. It got bad reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, both for the story and the way it was judged. But those 6 words that started a storm were what people remembered more than the movie itself. It was very bad for Vince Vaughn. He was out of the public eye for almost a year and even cancelled a comedy project with Drew Barrymore. He didn't come back in a big way until 2012, when he was in the sci-fi comic The Watch. As for Ron Howard, he moved on in silence. The only time he brought up the controversy again was at an NYU directing seminar, where he just said, "Every controversy fades." After all these years, the electric car scandal was more than just a Hollywood story. It changed the way we talked about humor, respect, and where the line should be drawn between the two. The anger died down over time, but it sent a strong message. Now that ideals are changing quickly, even a joke can shake up a business. Mel Gibson. Ron Howard has always been known as one of the nicest guys in Hollywood. He's stayed grounded, honest, and admired by almost everyone he's worked with, from his days as a child actor to his time as a two-time Academy Award-winning director. Howard is cool and kind, which stands out in a field where egos and tempers are common. However, even Ron, who is usually a calm person, gets angry sometimes. And one of those times was when he thought the Academy had missed what he thought was the best movie of his career. That movie. It was Apollo 13. It wasn't just a critical and financial hit when it came out in 1995. It was a victory for movies. 9 Oscars were given to the movie, and it got 2 of them. It was even up for Best Picture. However, Ron wasn't nominated for Best Director, even though he got a lot of praise and attention. That hurt. As a filmmaker who put his whole heart into every shot, it was hard to see how the biggest night in the business could miss such a victory. He had just won the Directors Guild of America's highest award and been nominated for a Golden Globe. When he looked back, Apollo 13 seemed like his best work as a director. It wasn't easy to ignore the fact that the Academy turned him down. In that moment, Ron told Variety that even though he was happy with his DGA win, it didn't make him feel better about not hearing his name called for an Oscar. That same year, Mel Gibson won an Oscar for his role in the movie Braveheart, which was the big winner at the time. But the list of nominees for Best Director made a lot of people scratch their heads. For Babe, Gibson worked with Chris Noonan, Tim Robbins, Mike Figgis, and Michael Radford. For Dead Man Walking, Gibson worked with Tim Robbins. The Mailman. The mistakes were very clear. Martin Scorsese, Ang Lee, Rob Reiner, and Ron Howard were not included. Many people thought that the Academy's picks didn't really show which directors were the best that year. Howard was going through a very different kind of stress when he finally won the Oscar for Best Director for A Beautiful Mind years later. It wasn't because they were turned down this time. That year, the award was given by none other than Mel Gibson. They had worked together on the thriller Ransom in 1996, and Ron thought Mel was very talented. Afterwards, Gibson told HuffPost Live that he liked to do things his own way, which made the situation more tense than it should have been. A few days before the ceremony, Mel approached Ron and confidently told him, "I'm going to give you an Oscar, buddy." Ron laughed it off at first, but he couldn't help wondering, how could Mel possibly know that? As the night of the ceremony arrived, that comment was still echoing in his head. And when Mel finally opened the envelope and announced Ron's name, the director's first instinct wasn't pure excitement. It was disbelief. Ron actually turned around and asked to see the card for himself. Sure enough, there it was, his name printed in bold. It was a career-defining moment, one that came full circle from the disappointment years earlier. And even though Mel Gibson's confident prediction turned out to be true, Ron Howard's reaction said everything about the kind of man he is. Humble, grounded, and just a little stunned by it all. Wilford Brimley. In 1985, Hollywood was obsessed with sci-fi spectacles like Back to the Future and The Goonies. But while the industry chased adventure and special effects, a 31-year-old Ron Howard decided to go the opposite way. He wanted to tell a story about aging, friendship, and second chances. A film that blended heart with a touch of fantasy. That film was Cocoon. No one expected the production to turn into a behind-the-scenes battlefield, but that's exactly what happened between Howard and the film's most stubborn star, Wilford Brimley. At the time, Brimley was in his early 50s, already recognizable for his rugged face and no-nonsense attitude. A former Marine and ranch hand, he came to acting late, without formal training, and built a career on sheer authenticity. He had just appeared in The Natural with Robert Redford and carried himself like a man who didn't need Hollywood's approval. Ron Howard, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Methodical, disciplined, and respectful of every line in the script. He liked precision and control, while Brimley believed in instinct and honesty. That clash of styles, the young, rule-following director versus the old self-taught cowboy, was destined to spark conflict. From the very first week of filming in St. Petersburg, Florida, tensions ran high. The breaking point came during the scene where the elderly characters discover the magical pool that restores their youth. Howard wanted a big emotional reaction, shock, joy, even awe. But Brimley refused. In his slow, gravelly tone, he explained that a man who'd lived that long wouldn't overreact. He'd simply smile and take it in stride. Without waiting for approval, Brimley ignored the script and played the scene his way. Quietly, subtly, almost defiantly. The take was completely unusable, forcing a costly reshoot that drained nearly $200,000 from the budget. Cinematographer Don Peterman later remembered Howard doing his best to stay composed, while Brimley made it clear he wasn't about to be controlled. That was only the beginning. Brimley was infamous for his short temper and impatience. Crew members recalled moments when he lost it over last-minute changes, once even hurling a coffee mug against a wall in frustration. During one particularly heated day, he snapped at the assistant director, saying he didn't need advice on how to play an old man. He'd been one his whole life. Howard, overwhelmed, had to step outside just to cool off. The crew, meanwhile, learned to tread lightly whenever Brimley was on set. Off-camera, Brimley's reputation was just as colorful. While audiences saw him as the wholesome Quaker Oats spokesman, the friendly face urging America to eat healthy behind that image was a man brutally honest to the core. In interviews, he didn't sugarcoat anything. Years later, he even criticized younger actors for never having broken a sweat in their careers, a comment that cemented his reputation as Hollywood's grumpy truth-teller. Fast forward to 1985, and despite all the chaos, something unexpected began to happen. Brimley's defiance added an emotional realism to Cocoon. Take the film's final scene, for example. His character is preparing to leave Earth aboard an alien spacecraft, a farewell moment written to be full of tears and sentiment. But Brimley quietly changed course, choosing calm acceptance over emotion. The result was powerful. Everyone on set went silent, realizing he had made the scene far more profound. Even Howard later admitted that Brimley's choice, though unplanned, was the right one. When filming finally wrapped, the two men shared a quiet, uneasy truce. At the farewell lunch, Howard approached to shake his hand. Brimley accepted, leaving him with a parting remark that stuck with the young director for years, words that captured both respect and defiance in one breath. Despite the friction, Cocoon became one of Howard's first major triumphs. It earned 2 Academy Awards, including Best Supporting Actor for Donna Metch, and grossed over $85 million at the box office. Critics praised its warmth and sincerity, and Roger Ebert credited Brimley's grounded performance for making the story's miracles believable. In a twist of irony, the very man who made filming a nightmare helped Ron Howard find his footing as a serious Hollywood filmmaker. Brimley even returned for the sequel, Cocoon. The return, in 1988, but true to form, he refused to join the promotional tour. At a small press event in Dallas, he told reporters he hated the media and dropped one of his most memorable lines, saying Hollywood only told the truth when the microphones ran out of batteries. That blunt honesty summed up Wilford Brimley perfectly: stubborn, sincere, and unwilling to play by anyone's rules. And for Ron Howard, the Cocoon experience became an early, unforgettable lesson in the art of directing strong personalities. It taught him that sometimes the most difficult people on set can give a film its greatest authenticity and its lasting soul. Jeffrey Tambor. In early 2018, Hollywood was in the middle of one of the most turbulent chapters in its history. The Me Too movement had shaken the industry to its core, pulling powerful producers, actors, and executives into the spotlight for misconduct. It was a time when reputations could crumble overnight. And in that atmosphere, few expected Ron Howard, a man long viewed as one of Hollywood's most respected and honorable figures, to be caught in the crossfire. But his trusted collaborator, Jeffrey Tambor, was about to change that. Tambor, then in his 70s, had spent decades earning admiration as a gifted character actor. With 2 Emmy Awards for his role in Transparent, he was often praised for his ability to channel raw emotion and anger into powerful performances. Ironically, it was that very volatility that led to his downfall. In November 2017, news broke that 2 of Tambor's Transparent colleagues, Trace Lysette and Van Barnes, had accused him of inappropriate conduct on set. The report sent shockwaves through the industry. Within weeks, launched an internal investigation, and just 3 months later, Tambor was officially dismissed from the show. Despite his public denials, his reputation was severely damaged. By the time spring rolled around, most thought the story had faded. But then came a fateful New York Times roundtable in May 2018, featuring the cast of Arrested Development, a series Ron Howard produced and narrated. The event was meant to be a light-hearted press session to promote the show's new season. Instead, it turned into one of the most uncomfortable interviews in modern Hollywood history. Halfway through the discussion, veteran actress Jessica Walter, known for her role as Lucille Bluth, suddenly broke down in tears. Through visible emotion, she revealed that Tambor had once screamed at her on set so intensely that she was left shaken. She said she'd worked in the business for decades, but no one had ever treated her like that before. The room fell silent. Witnesses described the atmosphere as heavy, almost unbearable. As Tambor sat quietly, avoiding eye contact, several of his male co-stars, Jason Bateman, Tony Hale, and David Cross, stepped in, attempting to downplay the incident as a misunderstanding. Their comments sparked outrage once the interview went public. Viewers were furious at what they saw as men excusing bad behavior, while a woman in tears tried to speak her truth. The hashtag, Grant Justice for Jessica, began trending almost immediately. The backlash wasn't limited to the cast. Many questioned why Ron Howard, the producer of the series, hadn't intervened or defended Walter during the moment. Major outlets like CNN, The Guardian, and The Hollywood Reporter published headlines highlighting his silence. The implication was clear. People expected more from the man known for his integrity and calm leadership. Those familiar with Tambor's past weren't entirely surprised. His temper had long been infamous in Hollywood circles. Back in the 1990s, while filming The Larry Sanders Show, he was known for sudden outbursts over minor issues like lighting or camera angles. Crew members remembered him as someone who believed that losing his temper was part of accessing genuine emotion. It was a philosophy that fascinated directors but terrified co-workers. For someone like Ron Howard, known for discipline, collaboration, and respect, working with a personality like Tambor's was always a delicate balance. But after that New York Times interview went viral, there was no containing the damage. Netflix quickly cancelled Arrested Development's upcoming press tour in London just 2 days before the cast was due to travel. The media reaction was swift and brutal. On BBC's Newsnight, journalist Emily Maitlis described the moment as a wake-up call for Hollywood's long-standing tolerance of men's anger and power on set. Tambor soon appeared on Entertainment Tonight, admitting he was ashamed of his behavior, but insisting the situation had been exaggerated. It didn't matter. His career took a serious hit. He lost upcoming roles, sponsorships, and disappeared from the public eye for nearly a year. Meanwhile, Jessica Walter became a symbol of resilience. Her calm, forgiving response in later interviews only amplified public admiration. She said she didn't want anyone ruined, just for people to learn kindness. Her grace in handling the situation turned her into an unexpected voice for respect in the workplace. As for Ron Howard, the fallout forced him into rare self-reflection. Known for his quiet professionalism, he initially issued only a brief statement emphasizing that every film and television set should be a place of safety and respect. But instead of easing criticism, his neutrality made things worse. Variety ran a harsh editorial suggesting that silence in moments of harm was no longer a sign of humility, but of indifference. It was one of the few times in his career that Howard's calm demeanor worked against him. The man who had built a reputation for diplomacy and control, suddenly found himself accused of being too careful, too quiet, and too unwilling to take a stand. Months later, in an interview with Variety, Howard finally admitted that the experience had changed him. He said he'd learned that staying silent in the face of wrongdoing isn't always the safe choice. It can sometimes be an act of cowardice. Critics said the reflection came late, but it marked a turning point for him. The 2018 Arrested Development controversy became more than a single uncomfortable moment. It exposed how deeply Hollywood was rethinking power, accountability, and silence. For Jessica Walter, it was a moment of courage. For Jeffrey Tambor, it was a reckoning. And for Ron Howard, it became a painful lesson in what it really means to lead, not just behind the camera, but in the face of moral conflict. Tom Hanks. Was a quiet morning in June 2022 when Hollywood found itself shaken by something completely unexpected. The source wasn't a scandal or a leaked script. It was an interview. The New York Times had published a conversation with Tom Hanks, a man long regarded as the ultimate good guy of American cinema. But this time, Hanks didn't play it safe. He aimed straight at one of his own biggest film franchises, the Da Vinci Code series, and tore it apart. In the interview, Hanks described the trilogy as little more than a meaningless treasure hunt, calling it scavenger hunt type nonsense. For fans who once viewed the films as intelligent thrillers packed with mystery and symbolism, it was a shocking confession. Hanks went even further, saying the movies were more of a commercial enterprise than real art. By the time the third film came around, he claimed, even that commercial spark had burned out. His comments landed like a thunderclap, especially for director Ron Howard. This was a man who had poured more than 10 years of his life into the trilogy. The Da Vinci Code, 2006. Angels and Demons, 2009. And Inferno, 2016. For Howard, these films weren't just studio projects. They were deeply personal achievements, crafted with immense care and effort. Hearing his leading man dismiss them so casually was more than criticism. It was a personal blow. To understand why it stung so much, you have to rewind to 2005. That's when the cast and crew first landed in Paris to begin filming inside one of the most famous buildings on Earth, the Louvre. Securing that location was a near miracle. Ron Howard had spent over 6 months negotiating with French officials to make it happen, agreeing to strict conditions and secrecy. The production schedule was grueling, often running 18-hour days. Crew members recalled how exhausted everyone was. At one point, Tom Hanks was so drained he had to change costumes right there in the Mona Lisa gallery, just to keep up with filming. When the movie finally premiered at Cannes in 2006, it wasn't just a cinematic event, it was a cultural explosion. Religious groups, especially Catholic organizations like Opus Dei, condemned it for distorting the faith. Several countries, including Egypt, Lebanon, and Pakistan, banned it outright. What was meant to be entertainment had suddenly turned into a global controversy. Howard, known for his calm and good-natured personality, found himself thrust into a storm he never anticipated. As the debates raged, Hanks, being the public face of the film, tried to keep things neutral. When asked about the religious backlash, he simply reminded people that the story was fiction, not doctrine. But critics and audiences weren't satisfied. One New York Times review even suggested that Hanks looked like he didn't believe in the movie he was starring in. It was a brutal assessment and, more importantly, it marked the first visible strain in the friendship between Hanks and Howard. Their bond had once been rock solid. They'd first worked together on Splash back in 1984 and went on to create the acclaimed Apollo 13 in 1995. On earlier sets, they were inseparable. Howard even had a nickname for Hanks, calling him My Eyes. They celebrated birthdays together, shared champagne in the Louvre during filming, and were considered one of Hollywood's most reliable duos. But by the time Angels and Demons rolled around, insiders noticed a change. They weren't clashing or arguing, but the closeness that once defined their working relationship had quietly faded. Then came the 2022 interview, and it felt like the final nail. Industry insiders and fans alike saw Hanks' remarks as more than just a film critique. They saw them as a deliberate attempt to distance himself from the franchise that had made him one of the world's highest-paid stars. Some believed it was all about image. At the time, Hanks was promoting Elvis. Film critics were calling his best work in years. To many, it looked like he was trying to redefine himself as a serious artist again, shedding the commercial sheen that the Da Vinci Code trilogy had given him. The timing couldn't have been worse. Around that same period, old footage from a 2004 charity event resurfaced, drawing new controversy and forcing Hanks to issue an apology. Placed side by side with his recent remarks, it created a narrative that he was trying to rewrite his public image, distancing himself from past missteps and from a series that, despite its billion-dollar success, had become seen as pure commercial entertainment. For Ron Howard, it must have been a painful irony. Years earlier, he told a story in Rome about how much the trilogy meant to him. He had viewed it as a bold experiment, a fusion of art history, and big-budget storytelling. But after Hank's comments, the public began seeing Howard's work through a harsher lens, as art sacrificed for market appeal. Hank's words, intentionally or not, made it seem like Howard had lost his way chasing box office glory. Yet beneath all of that disappointment, there lingered something more personal. These two men had built parts of their careers together. They'd created films that became cultural touchstones and shared triumphs that defined decades of Hollywood storytelling. That's why, when Hanks dismissed the Da Vinci Code trilogy, it didn't feel like a celebrity distancing himself from a role. It felt like a friend quietly turning away from a chapter of his life that another friend still held dear.